Good day and welcome to today's show. I'm Rex, and today I have joining me Anthony Genzel. I appreciate him coming back on the show. We're going to talk today about leadership. And although tempting as it is, we're not going to interject too much about politics, although, sometimes you need to look at what's going on in politics to pull examples for good or bad leadership. But this is not a political show. We're here to help small business, and we'd like to welcome Anthony. Thanks for joining me again.
Thank you for having me again, and I'm glad to catch up. As you can see, I've taken to shaving every other week now since we discussed last. So one of my innovations to save time.
And we all need to innovate. I'm glad that the working from home and the confinement finds you well. I was reaching out to you because I came across these two articles in the Harvard Business Review, and after reading them, I thought, wow, very useful. Not so much in the sense of perhaps what they were written for at the big corporate level from HBR, but for our conversations, how we talk about leadership in small business these days is so important. And if we can just maybe go through those, there were 12 steps there, and I thought, be good to have you come on board. We'll talk about the 12 learnings that they came up with from their research into leadership. Did you have a chance to read that?
I did. Yeah, I read that, and I liked that article, and the innovation during a crisis article was great. And I think, like you said, while it was crafted, I think focus on more enterprise organizations, that all that still applies to smaller companies. Smaller companies are often getting hit hard. So
yeah. And the lessons were in a form that I think any of us could really appreciate. I'm just going to go through them with you. So this is now how they framed this article, and the research was, unfolding events and responding to those, how to communicate and how to extract and apply the learnings that you've developed going through the process. And the first one that they talked about, the lesson was the update intel on a daily basis. And I can certainly appreciate that these days. Yeah. It seems like every day there's new guidance coming out, or there's, more information, more data. Because this event is so data driven, everybody's been looking at, pushing down the curve and working hard to do that.
Yeah, and that, like you said, it changes constantly. So if you're waiting a week to communicate with your team, the changes, as we've all seen throughout this, that occur within a week, really are drastic. So, you have to keep on top of it, and, you have to let your team know that their safety is important to you. So keeping them abreast of all the changes and updates related to the crisis outside, as well as keeping them updated on all the changes, the shift, that related to their shift to working from home, related to things that, keeping them comforted in the fact that you're keeping them employed essentially, or what the next steps are for the company. It's really important to keep them in the loop, and that communication consistent and frequent.
Yeah, the frequency, I think, is the most important, and setting the expectation that, look, it's difficult now to tell you what a 1 week, 2 week, 1 month looks like ahead of us, because the data is changing so rapidly.
Yeah. Flexibility is so important. I think that may be touched on later in the article, but it really is important to be flexible and be able to change and not be so hard and set in stone on everything at a time like this.
Yeah, their point number 2 was keeping aware and being aware of those hypes, particularly in the news cycles. And, and that's where, I want to sort of separate myself. I don't really want to look at the politics, because our news cycles are pretty much hammering the politicians and the politics every single day, every minute, every second. So this is more from a business perspective, be aware. And what I do for this is I take a broad base of information, so I don't just go to one news source to capture my information.
Yeah.
How about yourself? Where are you getting your info?
Yeah, I dig around a lot. I look at multiple sources as well. I watch various news programs and to keep the program non-political. I won't mention specific channels or anything like that.
No, don't
give away
yeah.
affiliations, but but I'll watch television. But I'll also I like to look at in the U.S. at least there's essentially two sides. There really should be more of a gray area in my opinion in the middle where people can meet. But really, there's two sides to it here in the U.S. And so I try to look at both sides and see where both sides are coming from because people think differently. So you have to kind of explore, and you can't look for biased information to just prove your own point, right? You have to be open to looking at everything that's out there. Beyond television, obviously researching, looking at the internet, digging around different sites. For me, beyond the news, I have to keep in touch top of various marketing trends because right now that's changing and companies are changing the way they market their business. So I have to be on top of that so I can help them through these challenging times. So, it's the information's coming from everywhere.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, so true. And which brings up their next point, which is that don't assume that the information is informedness. That don't assume, just like you said, that people are taking in the same information you are or interpreting the same information the way you are. I bumped into a fellow yesterday at the shops, and he was obviously a businessman, a small business shop, brick and mortar, and thought what a bunch of hype it was. And, I lacked a response at the time. And thought about it, you reflect on these things afterwards, like what should I have said? And it's, I'd really like to go back and say to him, look, I'd rather have an over response with an underperform than an under response and this thing get, ridiculously out of control. It's already ridiculously out of control, but
the numbers are already too high. And I think there's a lot of people who took this too lightly. And not, and that's, I think people, I think one thing that's kind of, we've had epidemics and breakouts in different parts of the world, and a lot of times they're contained fairly quickly, and the death toll is smaller. And I think there's a lot of hope. I think that this was going to be the same. But there was also a lot of evidence that it wasn't, and I think sometimes that was ignored. And you really have to be open to the info. And like you said, you can't assume that your team really has the latest and most accurate information. You have to work to be able to provide that and make sure they're on top of it. And, what they do with it from there, you can guide them as much as possible, but at least you're able to inform them, get that out to them.
Yeah, exactly.
And I had a situation very similar to what you ran into at the grocery store, and I bit my tongue as well. And I kind of look back and I think maybe I should have said something.
I know, and it's look, Anthony, it's tough not to do that, But you certainly, I've certainly had to, manage a lot of that because my first instinct was to react, but I pulled up and. We'll see you soon.
Have a good one. Great. You keep thinking that.
So their next point is one that obviously why I asked you to come on the show, which is to use experts and forecast carefully. So if your business is not particularly staffed, or you don't have that ability, those experts on staff to come in and advise you, for example, on a the health and safety aspects of your team, maybe like how do you set up your operation so your team is safe. Bringing in those experts, bringing in the experts to help you through the crisis aspect, to augment the skills that your team might have. So you just gave us the example of where you're going in, and acting is that reference point. You might not be the only one in that organization. You might be one of many. Tell us about some of that experiences that you've had recently.
Yeah. Well, update. Well, oddly, so we're connected with within my role in the Granite Creative Group. I'm owned by another company, and it's kind of a circle of companies. And one of the companies is a healthcare technology company. Oddly, we actually have access to an infectious disease expert. Most companies aren't going to have that. So we had a really good source of information giving us the latest and greatest, which is really hugely helpful. Most companies aren't going to have that, so they have to look outside for that. What I've tried to do is help companies with. I've done a lot of working remotely. I've led teams both remotely and in person. So one area that I've tried to provide support to companies is to kind of give them guidance how to manage a remote workforce and how to work through the changes, what technology to use, things like that, because you're obviously shifting technology specifically that you're using, the way you communicate. I find that a lot of times teams actually communicate more when they're working remotely. They feel kind of a need to, and there's an anxiety about it. So I think bringing someone in, whether it's a marketing expert for marketing advice or it's a healthcare expert for healthcare advice, bringing someone in who temporarily can kind of ease that anxiety and provide you with direction that you definitely you don't necessarily have inside your house. Really help the organization flow. You can't really, not all the companies have the resources to do that, but if you can, you really should look into it, because you can't try to make decisions on something that you have 0% expertise on. It's really hard.
I know one organization that has brought in former special ops people to help them through that managing of crisis. And, obviously having good results with their experience, bringing in, here's what we need to think of next, right? We're in this stage. What do we think of next?
Yep. And I'll throw out there, we I do marketing for as the agency within the group. We do marketing for the different companies within the circle of companies. And for the healthcare company, we've been crafting. We have a physician burnout product, and we've realized that this crisis, burnout is a problem already for physicians. It's taking it to a whole other level with all the extra weight pressed on them, not just from perspective of burnout from being frontline, but also trying to keep your practice open if you're not frontline, if you're not necessary. So we've developed additional tools to put out there. I've helped them. I've helped them kind of create a direction on them and create the promotion of them to help to be able to help professionals. So coming up with looking at what your company can do to help out other companies who are struggling right now in a genuine way. You have to make money, obviously, but you don't want to you don't want to go and price gouge or anything like that. You want to create a minimal product that can help them without creating a new cost or something like that, or additional too much effort.
Yeah, that's right. And we're going to talk about that. Stick around, because we're going to talk about that in our innovation coming up. That's exactly the topic that's on that board. So one of the things that you just mentioned was that information and bringing in that information, and you're bringing these others that information, and it's the point number 5 was the constant reframing your understanding of the problem. So it's not just tunnel vision. You're constantly, refocusing and saying, okay, this is what we know now. I'm taking into, that my experience and getting to the next point. And my next point is avoiding those bureaucracies, because, having, you're obviously experienced working in the healthcare bureaucracy and understanding that it can be a challenge, the interests within that bureaucracy, aligning it to the cause, the purpose, the problem, the crisis. So, avoid that, be aware of that. and make sure your response is in balance across these 7 dimensions. And I just want to mention them. So, and we mentioned some already. So that communications, those employee needs, the travel, that remote work that we touched on, supply chain globalization and stabilization, the business trading and forecasting, and being part of the broader solution. So that's what I just wanted to jump into that, because that's what you were talking about. You know, whatever our perspectives are, whatever direction we're headed, they need to be for the common solution.
I think you have to find a way to take your expertise and use it for the good to help companies that don't have that expertise. So, you know, I think I encourage people to think about, what do I do that I could, you know, offer to a small business owner struggling and not sure, and fill a gap for them to help them stay afloat and ease their concerns during a time like this.
Yeah. And when we're building a team, let's call it a crisis response team, we want to make sure that the roles of the individuals on that crisis response team are focused on what their skills are. There's no point in giving someone in marketing an accounting job to do during a crisis, you know. So we want, if it's people skills, then we put, you know, that people person in front of the people response, that human response. If it's, you know, a technology, we have to rethink of how our processes are working, how our technology is working. We have to, you know, do those things and make sure the right person is leading that, because when we've got a team, we've got to, you know, break things up and make sure that, you know, people are doing what they're tasked to do. We need to use resilience in our principles and our policies. So if, you know, we've got a process that is highly dependent on perhaps a particular nation, such as China or India, and they're offline, you know, I need to build resilience into, you know, my business to protect me from that.
And I think, you know, that's why it's important to plan ahead and think about these things. And a time like this, you know, a lot of companies may not have planned ahead, may not have had alternative solutions for supply chain or whatever the issue might be. But now is the time to reassess those areas, and that a lot of problems come to light, and you highlight some areas where you had some issues or you had some gaps that you needed to fill. Now's a good time to step back and kind of fill those gaps and look for, you know, how can we avoid this in the future if we're running into this. So it's a great time for companies to reassess their needs and the way they approach things.
Yeah, and build that resilience now going forward into their operations and business. Yeah, exactly. So their point number 9 is prepare now for that next crisis. And what I wanted to say was that another article I was reading was talking about, you know, when you're in a crisis, you really need to think about that worst world, right? What's the worst world that we're gonna be in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and sort of work back from there. There's not much point in putting your best world outcomes into it, because the chances are that you're going to be somewhere in the middle there. And if you go to the worst, you can always work your way back, but it's tough to get, you know, yourself from a starting point to that worst. It's much more difficult. What's your thought?
I agree, because, you know, you're already kind of hit unexpectedly, something like that, you know, and we were sitting back in, let's say, December, you know, it's not really thinking that anything like this was going to happen, and a lot of companies weren't prepared. You know, so this is sort of worst case scenario. If you could be in December and see where you would be in, you know, this is kind of okay, if this happened, this would be worst case scenario. So you're right. You want to take that, and what would be the worst case scenario from here? You know, we could be back to work in, you know, 30 days and everything's back to normal, but you don't want to plan for that, because that's likely not going to happen. Hopefully it's not worst case. Hopefully it's more in the middle, like you're saying, but it does have a plan. It's more fully developed and accounts for everything. So, you know, if things just continue to, you know, cases continue to rise, and 6 months now we're still working from home, and you know, the companies that thought they would be back in business by now still aren't, think about ways that you can transform your business. I mean, you can't transform a pizza shop, unfortunately, but there's certain businesses that you can, shift your production of a certain product into producing something else. You see a lot of companies shifting from producing whatever they might have been producing to now producing parts for ventilators and things like that. So you have, I was reading about a company taking 3D printing and producing valves, I think it was, for ventilators. So they're able to produce those pretty quickly, and it's completely different than, I don't recall the product, but it was a completely different product than what they were producing. So think about ways you can innovate your business and change your business, to stay afloat. I mean, it's important to know if it does rise to this level, you have a plan to stay alive during that time.
Sorry, I was just checking my levels there. Yeah, no, exactly.
Good.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And yeah, it's a whole new world. I could have delved so much into, some of that misinformation, like you were saying we were getting earlier. It could have put some people in a bad position, and I fear that might have been the case. And look, historians are going to have a field day. They'll be writing volumes for centuries to come, I'm sure, on our, hey, look at what happened back in 2020.
Well, we keep telling our kids they're going to be learning about this in history class in 10, 12 years. And, it'll be, some decisions will be made, but they're, like I said, even in 10 years, it'll be changing. Opinions will be changing. So be interested to see what their textbooks say about it at that.
Yeah. I reckon there will be an entire chapter in an economics class, or a business, crisis management class, and not just focused on one individual, right? Here's a broader look at, here's a more scientific diet to it than just
there will be some individuals who I'm sure will be a focus, but
there already are. They released books last week.
Yeah.
So, and it's important, Anthony, not for the, small business, not just to focus on making this an intellectual exercise of, okay, we're all prepared and we have all these plans. It actually there has to be action. It has to be actionable. There has to be things that you do that, have meaning. And it's not just, creating another volume for the bookshelf. It's really got to, have beyond the intellectual stuff. You got to really put principle and practice into place.
Yeah. And this can really transform the way a company operates. It can transform the complete face of the company, and the company does sometimes. So.
Yeah, I think so.
Game changer.
Yeah, game changer. And reflecting on what you've learned throughout the process was another their point 11. So it's that continuous take in information, reflect on what we've learned, go to the next step, repeat. And it's a continual, and preparing for a changed world was their closing lesson. That, and you mentioned earlier, here we are. We wouldn't have dreamed this in December.
No.
Hope for, plan for the worst, hope for the best. But we do need to plan for a changed world. In that, there is no doubt. Now, we talked throughout about innovating in a crisis. And I want to jump to their second article, which was innovating in a time of crisis. Now, their big one, we've talked a little bit now already about the problem solving has to be at the heart of that. When you're innovating, changing your business model, changing your product, changing your service, you have to, really like you've done with your business, what are we solving? How are we helping the current crisis with now our new offering? And I think that's, a great way to innovate.
Yeah, and a lot of companies have the technology and they have the expertise, and they just, especially if your current product offering isn't necessarily a priority sell for people right now. If you can come up with a product line that helps your company stay afloat, helps you generate revenue, but also helps solve the problem. And this is obviously huge problem. You can keep afloat while doing good, which is something that I think all companies do or should aspire to do. You know, I would hope that that's the goal.
That's right. I saw a 3D printing expert move his learnings and understanding and work to printing protective equipment. So that personal protective equipment, such need, he's converted his, whatever. I think he was a student, and converted all that equipment that he had to that endeavor. And I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, and even something simple like people are making kind of makeshift do-it-yourself masks. It's not from a company perspective. It's not helping the company. You're not going to sell a handkerchief mask, but it could keep your team safe. If you can't access masks for your team, you could create them for your team, and if they have to keep working, find a way to keep them safe.
And that brings their next point, which is that clarity around that purpose that we've talked so much about already. That's, and their third point was seeing the system differently. I thought was an interesting point, that, how we used to, and this the point I brought up earlier, how we used to look at a problem. We can't look at that with the same knowledge. We almost have to drop, our preconceived notions and look at the problem from a complete critical thinking perspective, that okay, everything that I thought I knew about the problem, I don't, or the system or the solution, I don't know that anymore. There's no certainty, so I need to tackle this from that clear slate mindset.
Yep. Yeah, and that's the whole point about bringing in a third party, a consultant, someone who can look at your operations with a clean slate and not have any preconceived notions about it. I think sometimes businesses are reluctant to do that. They know their business so well, they're afraid to let someone in and what they might find out, but you can really only benefit from it unless you get some really bad consultant in that doesn't know what they're doing. If you get someone good in, they can really give you some great advice that you've been blindly looking over, that's been right in front of you because you're just so ingrained in your business.
Yeah, exactly. A big point they make, which is their next point, which is that sort of that freeing of the organization and allowing people to be innovative, even though we might have, maybe it was a bureaucracy before, or some sort of hierarchy in the organization that prevented some of the underlings from really flourishing and being innovative. We want to unfreeze that. So if you've got a good idea, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that one of the sayings that I think is pretty well known at this point, but it's something I always go back to, is Steve Jobs saying, I don't hire people so I can tell them what to do. I hire people so they can tell me what to do. So you hire smart people, and sometimes they don't get good. And, all these good ideas are hiding below the surface, but a crisis can open up. We need some ideas. bring any and all ideas, and you really find that your team has a lot to offer. Very valuable.
And you give them their next point, which was that creating a bias towards the action, and sort of not that analysis paralysis that we might have seen in past years. I know I've had many experiences with companies that would spend literally months and sometimes years analyzing the problem. Agile came along and sort of broke us of that bad habit, which is, now we can develop quicker, faster, get to the same end, but we've got results along the way. And that's why that's why I liked it. Yeah.
And I think you have to not be afraid to fail sometimes. If you're gonna take 3 years to make a decision, the problem is probably going to get a lot worse in that time, and then that decision you made may need to be changed because the problem's changed during the time. So being able to fail quickly and adjust, I think, is what they say. You don't fail epically or anything, but fail fail quickly, learn from your mistakes, adjust, and you'll get to that answer and get to the solution a lot more quickly than just all the red tape and bureaucracy in the middle.
Yeah. Fast action, unfreeze, digital learning as an example. We see all these young students at home now. Teachers have moved rapidly from teaching in a classroom to setting up and now teaching virtually online. Microsoft Teams is doing a phenomenal job, I think, in getting a classroom set up online. I was speaking yesterday to a good friend. Their kids are using Microsoft to connect with the teachers, having some audio, video, technical bandwidth, technical challenges, but it's really it's moving. I can see it.
Yep. Yeah, and I think something like this really forces you to move forward and change. I think one thing it's going to do, company and school, things like that, are going to be a lot open to remote. They're going to realize that they're going to see that it's really a seamless process. There's a lot of value in it. Has a lot of value to the organization, a lot of value to the team members, the freedom that they get. There's so much value to something like that. Schools, I worked in higher ed for a while, and a lot of numbers, student numbers were dwindling for a lot of programs. The ability to reach, for a program in Virginia, to have students in California by using, creating an online program, a seamless online program, that really opens up new revenue streams. And so, it's sometimes innovation happens because of necessity, and our pretty much all the time, it's you may not realize there's a necessity, but it's there, and someone figures out a way to help with it, and keep us forward as a world, as a society.
So, Anthony, thank you so much for sharing with us today your knowledge. Really appreciate you coming on the show, and take care of yourself, your family, your colleagues, your loved ones. Let's reach out again. Let's do this again.
Let's definitely do that, and I hope you and your family stay safe. Stay inside, making these shows until it's over, and you'll have a stockpile of 100 of them ready to go.
Gosh, I hope we're out of this sooner than that, but you got it.
So too, yep. But the main point is stay safe, and always enjoy chatting with you. Look forward to the next time.
Thanks, Anthony. All right, that's all we've got for today. Thanks for joining Business Cas with Rex.